Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome to the Cinema Courtroom, a podcast where your favorite blockbusters await trial with your very own host and galactic judge, Makram Mark, hosting this experience. Do not forget to like and subscribe on whatever, and I mean whatever, streaming platform that you're listening to, whether it be Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, or the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel, you name it, because every click on an icon counts. Don't forget to ring the notification bell and share this podcast with your friends, family, cat, dog, pigeon. We do not discriminate here. Now, without further ado, let's talk about X-Men: Days of Future Past.
If you want to fight, Eric, I will give you a fight!
Let him come.
You abandoned me! You took her away and you abandoned me!
Angel. Azazel. Emma. Banshee.
Mutant brothers and sisters, all dead!
Countless others. Experimented on. Butchered.
Eric!
Where were you, Charles? We were supposed to protect them. Where were you when your own people needed you? Hiding. You and Hank, pretending to be something you're not.
Eric!
You abandoned us all.
You are now about to listen to my thoughts about X-Men: Days of Future Past, which is very, very much in the past. But just like Logan for the majority of this motion picture, I have a keen interest in revisiting past releases like X-Men: Days of Future Past, which should explain why I want to talk about it. Especially, considering that Days of Future Past is on my list of best comic book pictures of all time, without question. Now, notice how I said that it's only on my list? It's obviously not up there. Logan is number one on our list, obviously, but when it comes to the X-Men franchise, forget about, other masterpiece comic book movies. Days of Future Past is up there in second place. And you know what? To be, quite generous, even though Logan is technically an X-Men saga film, let's just say that Logan isn't an X-Men film. It's just a beautiful film in itself, but nothing to do with the X-Men. Then Days of Future Past would actually be in first place. I should do a ranking of every single X-Men installment, because I know for a fact that Logan will be on my top number one corner, and then I'll have Days of Future Past in second place. Okay, so before I get sidetracked, I just want to recap the premise of X-Men: Days of Future Past before I get started with my review. Wolverine travels back in time to prevent Mystique from assassinating Trask, whose death leads to the creation of the Sentinels, which are robots designed to kill mutants. There are many reasons that I love X-Men: Days of Future Past so much, which involves the acting, time-traveling elements, and thematic undertones that are explicitly present in this picture. For one, the acting in X-Men: Days of Future Past is luminescent. There is a scene which involves the two different actors for Charles Xavier, Patrick Stewart and James McAvoy, and the way that they convey the vivid contrast between past and future Xavier complements the screenplay for this movie to a significant extent. The assertion that this film is packed with emotion isn't far-fetched. From the scene where Magneto had an argument with Charles on the plane, I believe I included a little snippet before this segment begun, which gave you an idea of how Magneto is out to seek revenge. I mean, all of that is illustrated in the movie, and the sheer amount of Eric's pain and sorrow to the scene of his powerful speech in the stadium. Let's not forget that Magneto has been dealt a shitty hand in life, and it's been humans that were responsible for his pain and suffering. In the very first X-Men movie, it begun with him in the Holocaust, and it's pretty much a fundamental origin point to his character arc, because this is where he loses all faith in humanity. And then when he finds out that he has those godlike powers, because, he can manipulate metal. Actually, in X-Men Apocalypse, it established that he could pretty much manipulate the whole Earth, because there's metal around us, minerals. Now, granted, some of the action in X-Men Days of Future Past might have been a bit weak in some moments. However, the acting in this movie is a substantial redeeming variable, and it captivates the audience, which therefore makes them invested in the character arcs, not just filler action, which, again, the action in this movie, I'll take it or leave it. Except the opening scene and the final scene, where Magneto is giving his speech, and it juxtaposes with the Sentinels slaughtering the mutants and then the robots in the stadium. That was pretty rad, to put it mildly. How about the time traveling plot? The theory of time travel in this movie was actually very intriguing. Sending Wolverine's consciousness back in time instead of just, conjuring a lame time machine or teleportation plot, or, pull off some Rick or Morty shit, was a genius move. Yes, it was designed to make Wolverine the main protagonist of an X-Men movie again. But it also meant that we got to see what Elliot Page's Kitty was capable of whenever it came to her mutant abilities. And I think that in itself is very cool. It was also a good narrative device to build on the emotional and mental strain of these time-traveling abilities. The moment that Kitty lets go, whatever Logan did creates a new timeline displacing the old existing one. And if Kitty were to do it again, then it creates another new timeline. So it's kind of like you're deleting a file and then creating a new one. But then you can delete the file again, and then you can create a new one for your desktop, and then it can go on and on and on. It pretty much it solves the whole conundrum about, Logan is not allowed to touch anything, or he's not allowed to talk to anyone, or bet on any sporting events, because he can do pretty much whatever he wants. But the movie pretty much embraces the outcome that, okay, well, he can go ahead and do that. In fact, that's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to change what happened in the past so that it can impact the future. So it pretty much means that the ending is a result of the alteration of the past. And I think that all of these elements elevated the third act for this movie, because the Sentinels were killing mutants left and right. And while everything was going on in the stadium, Charles had to talk Mystique out of shooting Trask in order to not inspire him to create the Sentinels. And it's at that last minute moment when Xavier just manages to convince Mystique, his childhood friend, to drop the gun. When Kitty finally lets go, and as a result, the success of the mission creates a more successful timeline, there's the third act closing point. And I mean, that's just how the plot of this movie is organized throughout its three act structure. And I commend the writers for structuring out the screenplay within a single thread, where if the needle drops, it then alters the reality of the story. It gives X-Men Days of Future Past its epic and realistic touch. It adds stakes that keep the audience on the edge of their seat if they're watching it for the first time. I do think that if you were to rewatch it, then you're kind of like, you're not like on the edge of your seat, but you're still amazed at what story that they're able to come up with. Especially because The Last Stand wasn't really a commercial success. So I think Days of Future Past was meant to kind of erase that timeline and attempt to form a new one. Another thing that I appreciated about how they implemented time travel in this movie, it instantly connected X-Men First Class with the original X-Men cast. And it not only connected X-Men First Class with the casting, we have that Wolverine cameo in X-Men First Class. And when he tells, Charles and Eric to go fuck themselves, well, that is actually used against him in X-Men Days of Future Past when Wolverine later asked Charles for help. And Charles is like, oh, we came to you a long time ago and you just told us to fuck off. So, I mean, there's that when it comes to the genius time-traveling plot. There's one thing about the plot for this movie in general that has been nagging me, though, which is the last shot of this movie. After Magneto tosses Wolverine into the ocean, Stryker's crew manages to track Logan down and retrieve him from the water. But then we have the last shot of Stryker, who is actually Mystique. Okay, I guess. I mean, I would have loved to have seen that storyline resolved in another movie, but then X-Men Apocalypse, it completely retconned that ending of Days of Future Past in a new timeline, where it has become apparent that Wolverine got the adamantium claws. Well, how did Mystique lose them then? Him. How did Mystique lose Logan? I mean, did she even lose Logan? Is there a backstory that we're supposed to know? Because they aren't telling us. And I know you might be wondering, Makram, you're talking about Apocalypse, not Days of Future Past. Well, actually, I wouldn't have had a problem with Wolverine being injected with adamantium in a new timeline if Days of Future Past didn't showcase their open-ended ending. Because when that cliffhanger of Days of Future Past was exhibited on the screen, the moment we saw Stryker's eyes, the visuals, it created expectations and speculations in audiences who were invested, in the X-Men franchise. So, anyway, that is my main criticism for X-Men Days of Future Past. The unjustified and totally random ass ending. But how about the main theme of this movie? Are the themes of this movie any good? When it comes to the thematic undertones? Because, believe it or not, the theme of X-Men Days of Future Past is basically how one would perceive a movie like Lord of the Rings or Castaway. The movie has a message that can resonate with the average moviegoer in real life. And that's something that I think every movie should do, in a way. It should kind of, do this thing where you take something that resonates with you and then apply it in your own life. The line that Charles said to his younger self, Patrick Stewart to James McAvoy, just because someone stumbles and loses their path doesn't mean they're lost forever. And I mean, there are moments where you or someone that you know might stumble and become their worst selves. But then there's that relieving line that makes you evaluate the situation that you're in a fresh light and then contemplate to yourself, maybe this person isn't really hopeless or a lost cause. And I mean, that's who Mystique is in the movie. She could be anyone who is about to make a very deadly mistake, but if you believe that there's hope in that person, just like Luke believed that there was hope in Darth Vader, then there is a chance that might just save that person's life. And it might just prevent them from making a long-term mistake. And I think that sentiment is just beautiful. X-Men Days of Future Past is not a good movie for the X-Men chronological universe as a whole. Keyword, chronological universe as a whole. The MCU does a much better job chronologically when it comes to being consistent, albeit a few casting inconsistencies and maybe one timeline mishap. Other than that, the MCU does a much better job than the X-Men, especially Days of Future Past, where apparently Wolverine had a flashback to a different actor of Stryker when he was in the same room with the recasted version of Stryker. I mean, how does that make sense? If anything, it made things worse for the new timeline, but not any better. However, that is besides the point when you perceive it as a isolated comic book motion picture. It is infested with exceptional acting, impactful moments, and intriguing time travel theory, which goes a long way when you're talking about a movie that has a title that involves the words future and past. The Cinema Courtroom contends that X-Men Days of Future Past will appeal to connoisseurs of the comic book movie genre, and also the average moviegoer with its riveting, epic, complex but easy to comprehend narrative, and plenty of solid emotional beats. And now we begin to approach the second half of the Cinema Courtroom show, which is the post-sentencing hearing. What is the post-sentencing hearing, you may ask? Well, I'm rather glad that you inquired about this, because in the first half of the Cinema Courtroom podcast, we reviewed X-Men Days of Future Past, which is one of many films that I select, whether they be old and new, big and small, underrated and overrated, the broken and the damned, black, white, brown, orange, and blue. Then, in the second half of this podcast, which is what I call the post-sentencing hearing, I assemble all of the leftover topics, just like Doctor Strange assembled the Avengers and Endgame, that pertain to the film industry in general. Movie news and movie-relevant subject matters that aren't just limited to one specific movie, and integrated into one post-sentencing hearing list. Perceive it as an after-party that is long overdue, where you, yes you, the amazing, esteemed viewers tuning in on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Amazon Music, the Cinema Courtroom YouTube channel, are invited, or in judiciary terms, an invitation to a retrial might also be given in order to rectify an unfair hearing. Because sometimes, like the organic sapient that I am, I mean, hey, I'm still, do I not bleed if you cut me? If you wrong me, will I not be angered? If you shoot me, am I not mortal? Will I not die? Do I not make mistakes? So, I find that I've been too critically generous or harsh about a movie. So the majority of the time, or all the time really, my opinions do change after a rewatch or two of the movie, which means I'm compelled to review it again in a post-sentencing hearing. If you listen this far into the podcast, then I salute you for sticking around to the second half of this podcast. If you enjoy what you've heard in the first half and what I'm about to say in the post-sentencing hearing, if you haven't done so already, I would very much appreciate once again if you give this podcast a reshare and like this episode by clicking the thumbs up. This way, you will be supporting the Cinema Courtroom along with its future episodes, installments, and assets. In this hearing, we are going to cover the following elements: the nuance of pirating movies, Bob Chapek being fired from Disney with Bob Igor replacing him. This is news from yesterday. And what Quentin Tarantino's last script for his 10th picture is going to be. I want to talk about a subject matter that affects conversational dynamics in the cinema industry in such a substantial way. And the reason for that in particular is because this subject matter has so many mixed opinions surrounding it by movie pundits, and that's pirating. For this segment of the post-sentencing hearing show, I want to talk about the nuance of pirating, because we tend to get too caught up in the low-budget ads that the FBI likes to send you on TV, right? Like, under the comedic illusion that their anti-piracy campaigns are making a massive difference, if at all. And making any difference at all will be a generous way to, compliment those FBI ads, because they make an insubstantial difference. I mean, sure, they're probably gonna spook a 6-year-old child from pirating Thomas the Tank Engine episodes, other than that, the responses that those anti-piracy ads would typically garner would be more along the lines of, "Oh no, I'm so scared. What am I to do?" It's more like that. And I would actually go on Pirate Bay to watch movies and all forms of other entertainment. Movies, games, and all the other stuff. Music, that's kind of the reality that we're living in. And before anyone tries to report me to the relevant authorities, Joe Rogan smokes weed, and he has a podcast show up and running on the air for the whole world to see. So it's not like anyone cares if you pirate something that you weren't going to pay for anyway. Because here's the thing too. If you're never going to buy or rent the movie or watch it in the cinema, well, the creators aren't going to get your money anyway. What difference is piracy going to make in the grand scheme of things? And no, it's not equivalent to snatching a DVD from a shelf in a store. DVD stock is finite. Unlimited files, on the other hand, that are backed up 24/7 on a cloud, are not. That is the distinction here. So don't tell me that by pirating a movie, it's taking it off the shelf, because I guarantee you that the only reason that robbing a Blockbuster store was problematic to begin with for the store owners was because they had to keep replacing the DVDs on the shelf. Whereas the equation for pirating is just money that isn't going to get paid. But it's not reducing stock. But my goal right now is to offer somewhat of a balanced perspective of the advantages and disadvantages of piracy. Because as I've already mentioned in the opening, piracy is packed with a lot of colossal nuance. The disadvantages of piracy are rather straightforward. It can affect the earnings of an industry, which is really just dependent on the business size. Like, if you pirate a movie from Mickey Mouse, Disney is not going to go bankrupt. So, pirating Aladdin is nothing to feel bad about. However, if you pirate something from an independent filmmaker who's trying to get by, piracy is a disservice to them because they need every drop of penny that they could get, when consolidating a living in the film industry. So there's that. There are also advantages to pirating that people often neglect because it's convenient for their argument. Pirated software is cheap and cost efficient because as long as you're paying for bandwidth, you don't have to deal with the burden of purchasing the movie on top of these extra variable costs and bills for other necessities. It is so easy for us to shame pirates for wanting to just get some sliver of entertainment in their lives. And it makes us forget that if they were in a better financial place, then they would have paid for the content anyway. It's not like they're actively seeking to harm artists. You know what actually harms artists? Plagiarism. Okay? You plagiarize an artist's existing work, then you're actually taking away attention from the artist. But when you're pirating their work, in fact, the more people who pirate movies, the more likely that the product is going to sell to buying consumers. If people didn't pirate season 1 of The Mandalorian when it premiered, I highly doubt it would have generated the pop cultural buzz that it did. Because let's not forget, when Disney Plus launched with, the first season of The Mandalorian, there are people who've heard of Baby Yoda, like, in a country that I'm living in, the UAE. And Disney Plus wasn't available then. So why else do you think that we've heard about it? Okay? Forget the marketing, the trailers. Why did Disney Plus subscriptions spike up? Because people pirated it. And it made sure that, all eyes were on their product. Let's say 1 million users pirated one Marvel movie. They'll watch it, and chances are that 100,000 of those million users will feel inclined to buy more Marvel movies. Boom. 100,000 customers were exposed to the product and want to buy your 4K editions because the product became more famous. And the reality is, and I know it should go without saying now because I've made it very clear, but pirating shouldn't be a red flag or frowned upon. Yes, there are times that it's an inconvenience. And yes, there are rare instances where it's dishonest to an indie filmmaker. But to a major studio, pirating content is just going to feel like an ant bite to them. Anyway, I would be very interested in your thoughts and opinions about pirating. Can it be beneficial to anyone? Can it not be beneficial to the cinema industry as a whole? I mean, I don't know. Like, are you sure about pirating in general? Or maybe you're just spectating this debate? Let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at the time of this recording, this news just broke. Bob Igor to return as Disney CEO in surprising shakeup. Bob Chapek departing. I am going to be offering my commentary about this latest development in just a moment. But first, let's go over the facts. Fact 1. The board has dismissed Bob Chapek and perceived Bob Igor to be the suitable person to lead the company again. Yes, again, in case you don't know about the politics behind Disney's leadership hierarchy, Bob Igor led Disney pretty much, he led Disney when they bought Star Wars and earlier before then. Fact 2. Bob Igor is contracted to lead the company for 2 years. In the meantime, Disney is searching for a new successor. All of that is happening just 2 years after Bob Iger has vacated his leadership role. Now, let's share my quick thoughts regarding this news. But before I continue, I would like to play something that is going to give you a little insight of how other stakeholders viewed Bob Chapek. Take a listen.
Well, thank you so much. And let's give another big round of applause to the Disney on Broadway cast of Lion King, Aladdin, and Frozen.
I mean, you heard that, right? Is this the corporate and stakeholder dynamic that Disney was just going to, allow to occur? The booing on the D23 stage? No, of course not. And this isn't really an unpopular opinion, but Bob Chapek had to go. A few years ago, no, not years, days ago, sorry, that would have been actually much better if what Bob Chapek did was a few years ago. But Bob Chapek decided to come up with the genius idea to lay people off in order to minimize costs, limit travel expenses, no free lunches. And the thing is, if you haven't looked at Disney's recent quarterly earnings, I encourage you to do so now. You'll see why Disney was right to fire Bob Chapek. And in case anyone wants to know whether or not I support Bob Iger, hell yeah I do. I mean, who wouldn't be confident in the man who oversaw Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilms, and even bigger and better, 20th Century Fox? He was responsible for acquiring all of these studios, not to mention Disney Plus, which serves as the permanent home of The Mandalorian, and many other shows that have been greenlit under his watch. What are your thoughts and opinions about Bob Chapek being let go and Bob Iger stepping in to replace him? Obviously, this is very significant news here. There isn't a sliver of doubt in my mind that you must at least be thinking a certain way of Bob Chapek being fired from Disney and Bob Iger replacing him. Let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom. Not a day goes by in the cinema industry where I don't admire the sheer level of commitment and spade work that Quentin Tarantino makes for it. He made a total of 9 movies. 9! I mean, how crazy is that figure? And you'd figure that after 9 movies, this guy is going to hang up his cape and retire. Well, we couldn't have been more wrong. Quentin Tarantino had a discussion with IndieWire the other day to promote his new book, Cinema Speculation. And he took care to mention that his last and 10th script is going to be original. Okay, so that interview obviously means one thing that isn't really new if you know enough about Quentin Tarantino's original directing style. He is going to go out with his 10th movie with a bang, not to mention what he's going to contribute to the world of television streaming. Who knows, that might actually be a new directing career path for him. Maybe he said that he's only going to do 10 movies, but what's to stop him from doing 10 shows or 10 seasons of a show? It's up to him, really. And even though the plot of his TV show is unbeknownst to Quentin Tarantino fans and other average moviegoers, I think that another thing to keep in mind is that Quentin Tarantino is not in a hurry to direct his last movie. There's no sense of urgency to just make it and put it out in the cinemas. Because even if Quentin Tarantino was to change his mind about making a 10th movie and stick of 9 movies, it's not like any rational moviegoer would blame him. He is on the list of top 5 film directors of all time, or at least he's on my list, but many people's list also. In fact, and I'm not one of those people, but there are people who, consider Quentin Tarantino to be the number 1 director. Period. I think he's like my number 2 director. Yeah, and he has managed to maintain a streak of 9 successful movies. So, that being said, I would like to know what my listeners think about this latest development about Quentin Tarantino's last script. We still don't know the plot, but we know that it's going to be an authentic motion picture if Quentin Tarantino is going to land the ball with this last movie. Do you think that he will? Or do you maybe think that he should retire while he is ahead now? Because, let's face it, there's always a chance that even the bestest of directors can fall short and end up making a bad movie. Let me know in the comment section below or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom whether or not you think about any of those things. And yeah, share your insights and I will consider it for a future episode. Links to our Twitter inbox are in the description below. We have now reached the end of this podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the Cinema Courtroom Show, where we critiqued movies. I had a lot of fun doing this podcast, so be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed the 27th episode of the Cinema Courtroom Show, just as I do every week, making them just for you. I hope to see you guys again in the next episode, which is unfortunately not going to come out this Friday. Instead, it is going to be released on Wednesday of November 30th. Yeah, November 30th. The week after that won't be the traditional Cinema Courtroom Show. The week after November 30th, it is just going to be a short bonus episode, and I honestly am not comprehensive of when I'm going to return to distributing 2 episodes a week, since I have a lot on my plate right now. That isn't just my podcast. That being said, you're still getting at least 1 podcast a week. And right now, I'm working on some fabulous ideas to enhance and expand the Cinema Courtroom Show. It's not going to be like some massive project or anything. I'm not going to follow up on it because it's something that's going to be gradually implemented in the show itself. But I am going to say that this time off from doing 2 podcasts a week and narrowing it down to 1 will be put to good use. Regardless though, I hope to see you guys again in the next episode, where we're going to talk about yet again another movie. Find out what that picture is when the next and 28th episode of the Cinema Courtroom Show launches next Wednesday. Again, I am sincerely sorry that it can't come out on Wednesday. No, sorry, not Wednesday. Friday. It's going to come out next Wednesday of the 30th. I'm reminding you again, in case you show up on Friday and then you hit me up and say, Makram, where is the 28th episode? The answer is right here. It's coming out on Wednesday, which I think will be a nice way of shuffling up the analytics, and maybe I can do like a Wednesday drop once in a while, depending how well that goes. Thank you once again for listening till the end. I am your Galactic Judge Bucker Mark, and I hope you have a spectacular day.
Hello there. Court is now dismissed.